Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Interviewing Wednesdays. We're very glad you're with us. It's February 24th, 2021. You're here for session number 8, asking questions at the interview. For those people on Zoom, as you have questions, as soon as you think of something, just put them in the chat box. That way, the speakers will, as soon as they take a break in their talk, they'll stop and take a look at it. So please just put your questions in there. For those people on Facebook, please just put your questions in the comment field. I'm monitoring that feed and I'll make sure we get those questions answered for you. For those people on Zoom, if you're using a PC or Mac, we ask that you use the speaker view, which is in the lower left-hand corner. Where that red arrow is, you can grab the little white line and adjust the size of the speaker and the size of the PowerPoint presentation, sliding it back and forth to make it whatever is convenient for you. Please note this event is being recorded and is currently live on Facebook. The recording will be on the Career.fw Facebook page and on the Career USA YouTube channel for others to view in the future. By participating in this event, and if you happen to post a comment in the chat box or have your microphone or camera on, you give consent for your comments, name, and picture to appear. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Morris. I founded Career.fw back in 2008 to help those in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in their job search. In 2012, I had launched CareerUSA.org to help people outside the DFW area. I've written a book called What I've Learned About Your Job Search that you may not know. Since 2007, I've been facilitating and leading the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group, and I'll tell you about our upcoming program at the end of this meeting. And since 2017, I've been a member of the practice interview team, and you'll hear more about that in just a couple seconds. We've got two speakers who have put together this 13-part workshop for us, Mark McDonald and Walt Glass. So gentlemen, please introduce yourselves.
All right, thank you very much, Jeff. I'm Mark. There's my picture and the Pit Crew business card. If you want to get a hold of the Pit Crew, for instance, if you want to send in your resume and a job description to get signed up for a practice interview, then you need to send it to that email address on there, dallaspitcrew@gmail.com. And the capitalizations don't matter. You can do it all caps or partial caps, but that's a direct email for managing all things Pit Crew related. And so I got involved with the Pit Crew in 2013. After I got laid off for the third time. My background is in telecommunications equipment, high-tech electronics, and I got laid off for the third time at the end of 2012. And then 2013, I found the Pit Crew and became a volunteer. And then in early 2014, I started leading the group, and I've been able to do it ever since. Even though I had a bridge job in there, I have now retired as of May of 2018. So that's my background. When we got together face to face, we'd have 40 or 50 people there, very much the same size as this kind of meeting. And at the end of the interviews, we'd do 3 or 4 interviews, and we'd have an education session. And so this webinar has grown out of that education session. And Walt and I put together 13 sessions, and I'll show those sessions in a minute. This is session number 8. One of the very best of all the great sessions we have is session number 8, asking questions. I'll talk a little bit more about that. I encourage you to link in with me. There we go. I encourage you to link in with me. Just search on my name or search on Pit Crew, and I'll be very close to the top. Just send me a note that says, I saw you on Interview Wednesdays, and I'd like to join your network, and I'll accept your invitation. And you can then leverage my network to find companies that might be suitable for you. I also do one other thing besides running the Pit Crew and being retired. I coach a little bit on one question. Why did you leave your last job? So I claim some expertise in helping people to answer that question with brevity and confidence, and also any follow-up questions that may be generated by their particular situation. So this is a one-on-one confidential discussion that you and I will have to figure out how to answer that question if it's going to be challenging for you. So you may have been laid off. You may have been the only person laid off, so a layoff of one. You may have been told that you were hired for cause, but they still gave you unemployment or a severance package. So we'll talk about how to deal with that and be confident and move on to what's really important, which is how you can help your new employer. And then finally, if you're new today, I see some new names. I see some familiar names and I see some new names. So if you're a first timer to this session, the interview session, please put in the chat box, first timer, and we'll see your name. And then those of you who have been here before, reach out to them. Let's make some connections and do some networking right here in the old-fashioned way. Walt?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Walt Glass. I used to work for a 3-year stint inside of the organization in leadership and development. And part of that was interviewing. And so the effort there was to try to do a better job of hiring on the hiring side of the desk. And then after working 25 years, I sat on the other side of the desk and I flunked. I didn't do well at all. So I figured out I better do something about this. So I started working on what's it like to actually be the candidate and how we can improve our skills and confidence for a successful interview. So I focus on basically a couple of things: selling ourselves, which is made up of who we are, what we do, and how we can help. Would you agree that the interview is a selling situation? It's a selling presentation. We are selling. We need to find out what they're buying, which is why we're talking about questions today. And the other thing is, how can we differentiate ourselves from all those other candidates? Now, I've interviewed quite a few people. Mark's interviewed quite a few, and I'm sure Mark will agree that we hear common answers to questions all the time. It's the same thing. And so if you put yourself in the interviewer's shoes and in their frame of reference, it just comes across as you're just one in the herd. You don't stand out very much at all. So it focuses on that in the interview success workshop. You have to be registered to attend. Look me up on LinkedIn and look at my about section. It gives you the information of how you can register. I do it on Tuesdays, 10 to 12. I only have a couple people at a time. And it's very informal. This is not a place where you have to have anxiety and stress and everything, because it's just a learning situation. How can we improve ourselves with learning? So you get to start over, you get to stop and think, which is a rare thing these days, but heartily recommended. So just come on down, sign up, and we'll have some learning without squirming.
Great. Well, thank you. All right. Well, today is Mark and we've said today is session number 8 of 13. In case you've missed the first 7, all of them are on the Career USA YouTube channel. Today's session, asking questions in the interview, which is always something that a lot of candidates forget to do or don't do very well. So Mark and Walt, take it away.
Wow. So when I opened my screen, it moved my menu to the top of the screen, so I couldn't find it. I had to unmute myself there. All right, everybody see the picture? We only been doing this for like a year. we're still,
by 2025, we'll be in good shape.
Yeah, we're still learning new ways to screw up. All right, one more thing. I'm going to get my chat box open so I can see when you guys ask questions. And as I mentioned, we used to give this briefly. It was only 20 or 25 minutes of education at the end of every weekly session, and it was very interactive. And so we try to do the best we can, but really what we've ended up with is a tutorial and a lecture. And but if you have a question, we want to honor that and get you an answer as quickly as possible. So when you think of them, go ahead and put them into the chat, and I'll be taking a look at it, and I may stop and answer it, but we'll certainly have a moment or moments during the interview where we stop, during the presentation where we stop to answer questions. So put your questions in the chat box as soon as they occur to you, and I'm going to post up my contact information right now. So there you go. That'll help you find me on LinkedIn as well. So here's our session today, session number 8, asking questions. And this is one of 13 sessions. It's the 8th one of the 13 sessions. And so if you are brand new today, all of these sessions are available from our recordings in the spring of last year and the fall of last year. And so now we're starting a new cycle, started on the first week of January, and we're up to session 8. But if you want to go back and look at some of these sessions that we've already done, or if you want to go forward and look at some of the sessions that we did in the fall, then you can go to the Career USA YouTube channel, and there's where you find them. Jeff mentioned that, but I just wanted to let you know because we do have a few people who are first timers today. So all this information's available, and we do it about, I guess we'll do it about 3 times a year. So this is the first cycle for 2021, and we're going to talk about asking questions, a very impactful way to build rapport, get a dialogue going, and learn some very valuable information. And I would say when people come to the pit crew and practice, maybe 1 out of 20 or 5% actually exercise asking questions during the interview. They wait, and probably you too, till the interviewer says, "Do you have any questions for me?" And you might have 5 minutes to go, you might have 1 minute to go. You may not have really any time. It's kind of just a perfunctory thing. So you need to practice and you need to learn. And we're going to talk about today how you ask questions during the interview, starting at the very beginning, but all throughout the interview. And so you'll come away armed with knowing how to do it, and then you'll want to practice actually doing it, because very few people do this naturally. Okay, so with that introduction, I think we're going to go with Walt first this time for this presentation. He's got some really good stuff, and then I'll kind of come back and give some higher level my perspective on it as well. So Walt, you ready to take over?
Got it. Okay, now the ever fun task of once you show your screen of finding the chat window.
Yeah.
That one is kind of elusive for some reason or other, but I've got it.
You also need to make your screen big, because right now it's squished in like a French fry. There we go.
All right. So why should we ask questions? Let's just start with the fundamentals. I mean, you're all pretty smart. You understand about asking questions. But let's just look at it for a moment from the fundamental point of view. Say, well, what's the value? Why should we even ask these questions? Well, the main thing that we want to do in an interview is find out if we want to work there. All right. They want to find out if they want to hire us. Well, we want to find out if we want to work for them. And so we should have a list of questions just like they have a list of questions. So if you sat down and said, okay, here's my ideal company, here's my ideal job, here's the industry, that sort of thing, what would I want to know in this interview to find out if I want to work here or not? And that's how you can start generating your list of questions. Now, there's lists of questions. I'll give you one in part of this presentation, but the questions that you ask are really very informative to the interviewer. We would love to create a conversation. No one enjoys an interrogation. So if you're sitting there thinking that all you have to do is just respond to questions and that's your job, we're missing out. We're missing out on a very, very significant difference in an interview. We would love to engage the interviewer. There's a section and down a little bit lower, it says, talks about interest, enthusiasm, build rapport. This is one of the tools that we use to do that. And also demonstrate our breadth of knowledge. So there's a couple of kinds of questions. There's one that just says, what keeps you up at night, which I would like you to never ask. First thought that came to my mind was my 2-month-old daughter, something like that. But it is asked so often, so many times, so many people do it. Let's just figure out another way to ask the same thing. What is it that I can do for you to help you? What are the challenges that you have that I can help you accomplish, and help you meet those challenges? So we really want to separate ourselves from other candidates. This is key. This is why I do the workshop. It's one of the main parts of the workshop is that differentiation. Be different. For example, Mark mentioned when you link with him, said send a little note, tell him that you met here during the presentation today. I suggest we always send a personal note. And there's some more details about that on what you can put in that note. But just don't do the standard thing that everybody else does. Do it differently than that. And that way we can really stand out. You know, if you've ever hired people before and interviewed people, I'm sure you've been through the process where after you interview all these candidates, you can't remember how to distinguish one from the other. You have to have an Excel spreadsheet with some characteristics on it and things, and rate high, low, or medium, or 1, 2, 3, or something like that to figure out how somebody might match. And you use some analytical tool to figure out how to hire somebody, which is a pretty poor way to do that. But we want to be able to stand out. We want to be able to be memorable. And there's several ways we can do that. And questions is one of them. So I was fishing around the internet one day and I found this interview with George Wright, who is VP of IT operations at USPS. And here's what he thought about on questions. He says, I asked the candidate if they have any questions for me. Now, here's why he's asking the question. I want to see how insightful they are and learn what is important to them. So your questions will tell the interviewer what's important to you. It will tell you how insightful you are. So when you can lead in with some information that you have learned and say, well, you know, I was listening to the earnings call and I saw your video on that, and the president was saying blah, 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 and I'm interested in what you're currently planning to do about that, something like that, all right? You'd be surprised how many people find the information out about their company on the first page of their website, and that's about the limit. I'll do a lot better than that, and we'll be judged by the questions we ask. So we're going to be judged by everything else: our appearance, our enthusiasm, our smiling. We got to remember to smile, and it kind of comes from within. It's not a technique. It's something that you are excited about the company and that sort of thing. But we'll be judged, and we'll also be judged on how we ask them. All right. If you ask them deadpan, you don't ask them with interest, you don't ask them with some enthusiasm, but real genuine curiosity about what the answer to that question might be, that's huge, hugely different. We've kind of got our mindset of, okay, I want to prepare this list of questions, and I got them, and I just simply ask questions. Ask them with interest, ask them with some zest, ask them with a little bit of energy in them. You're really interested in how they think about certain things. So here's some guidelines. Well, prepare your prioritized list. Prioritize because we may not get to answer or ask all of these questions. So what are the most important questions we want to put, and which ones are, if we only get to ask 5 or 6 questions, what are the 5 or 6 questions that you want to cover? And like Mark mentioned, we certainly don't want to wait to the end. Because when you wait to the end to ask questions, so you're going to have to, will you be able to get a response? Will you have a discussion about it? Will you be able to tell a story about how you accomplished something based on their response? You know, that's right. No, it's not over. One of the worst things you can do is they go, okay, you got any questions? You know, and I mean, the interview is over. So it's just kind of like Mark was saying, a perfunctory thing. So we don't want to wait to the end. However, at the end, we do want to have questions, all right? So I suggest that you don't ask questions about, you know, there's always, I tell you not to do something, and then I can think of a case where you ought to do that. Or I'll tell you to do something, and I can think of a case where you don't want to do that. So it really depends on who you're talking to, where you are in the process, and what the question is. I kind of avoid putting ourselves, what kind of training do you have? You know, what's your benefits? I really suggest you avoid the word benefits until the offer. But you can say a total compensation package. You could say something like that. But benefits kind of comes across as I really need the benefits, which is probably true. We probably do need the benefits. But if we show that that's the most important thing to us, simply by mentioning it, we are doing exactly that. So don't put ourselves ahead of the employer in this. Ask one at a time, no double questions. Double questions always fit where the second question is asked, is remembered, is responded, and nobody remembers the first question. Now, that's typical. It's not all the time. But if you get asked a double question, you got to write the second question down or something. I suggest you do that, then answer this one, and then come back and answer the second one. I will tell you that people are very impressed if you remember the second question that they ask you. But let's not put them in the same position, all right? Because they probably won't answer the second question. Then if you come back and ask the second question again, we've kind of gotten a little bit after them and say, oh, well, you didn't answer both questions. You didn't remember the other one. And that's kind of a negative thing. So just one question at a time. I would suggest we focus on open-ended questions, unless you need a particular clarification or quantification or something like that. But it's, I hear questions like this. They say, well, why is this position open? Was there somebody there? Is this a new position? Is this, and I do multiple choice. All right. I give them some, was it one of these three things? Well, it turned out to be number 4, which one you didn't list. So it makes you look bad. Therefore, just ask an open question that gets a more detailed response, and it also doesn't limit them to what they're talking about, what they're going to say. So always focus on those as best you can. And then multiple topics. I suggest when we ask questions that it's more important to ask a breadth of questions than it is a depth of questions. If you only ask questions about the job itself, you don't ask questions about the company, or you don't ask questions about things that you can help them do. You don't ask questions where you're showing interest in all the aspects of the company. Plus, when you're talking to HR or recruiter, that's a different set of questions than if you're talking to the team interview, or that's a different set of questions if you're talking to the hiring manager or the hiring manager's manager, okay? So who are you talking to, and what set of questions would be appropriate for your audience, right? Know your audience. So demonstrate curiosity and interest in all aspects. I suggest we personalize our questions. Not all of them, of course, but there's some of them I think that are really good. I know Mark is a strong favor of this. But I'm interested in your particular perspective on this. And then you ask that question because I'm asking you. So personalize that. Can you give me the reasons? Could you share the reasons? Stay away from why questions. Why is interrogation type thing. So rephrase it to, can you share the reasons? I'm interested in learning more about this on the reasons you joined the company. Or how would you define the expectations of the candidate? I saw the job description and I looked at things there, but tell me, what do you see as the most important thing that I can do to help you in this particular role? And can you tell me a little about your career? All right, personalize. That's also helping to build rapport and to make an engagement with your interviewer. Don't wait to the end of the interview. We've already talked about that. Make it conversational. If you don't get a chance to tell stories, then ask. And this is a question you can ask. Most of you know about star stories, and that's one of the, I think it's session 3 or something like that. But if they're not asking you that, you can say, well, they ask you a question, and in that particular arena, in that category, that area, you have a story that you can demonstrate your expertise and the results that you achieved on that particular area. So you ask them, would you like me to tell you about a time when and just give the result. When I saved $200,000, when I turned the customer around, whatever it might be. So they may want to hear a story, they may not want to hear a story, but we would like to ask to get them into a mode of seeing if we can tell it. Well, we'll stand out if we can be successful with that. And always have questions. I was talking with a person, he went through this series of interviews, and his last interview was the CEO. And so he had several interviews, I don't know, 5 or 6 interviews. And the CEO said, well, what questions do you have for me? He said, well, I don't think I have any. I think everything's pretty much been answered. So what's the message that sends to the CEO? It's something like, you're not interested in my perspective and how I feel and what I see in this role and in this company and where it's going and what's happening and how you fit, all that sort of thing. I mean, it's terrible. And I think he did not get the job just because he didn't ask that person questions at the end. Now, let's talk about asking questions. So I'm going to talk about a recruiter for a moment. because we deal with recruiters, so I decided to put a little topic in your session on this. So let's find out about our recruiter. So what questions do we want to ask our recruiter? This is just a sample. There's a lot more of them that I could ask, but if it's a recruiter and it's a call, they called you, said, well, what information do you have that interested you in contacting me? Now, I've heard some people say, what was it on my resume that interested you? All right. And that may work fine if they have your resume. All right. But maybe it's a referral. Maybe they don't have your resume, something else. So a little bit more general questions. What information do you have? So why are you calling me? What is it? There's something in there that you like about me, just about this job. And who are you? So are you a company recruiter? Are you a contingency recruiter, a retained recruiter, or the outsource type recruiter? I know that Toyota hired a lot of recruiters outsourcing to come in when they were hiring about 3,000 or 6,000 people when they moved to North Dallas. So, but find out who they are, because that will give you some indication. Like the contingency, very, very different than the retained. Retained is generally for the higher positions, but not always. But where do they fit into this? Who do you represent? A lot of them are closed mouth. They don't want to tell you the company because they don't want you to go around them. But there's no reason you can't ask. You may find out, and there's no harm. They're not going to hang up the phone because you asked that question. There's no risk in even asking the question. And what is your job specialty? So, recruiters generally hire for certain roles. And so what is theirs? If you're trying to choose a recruiter, these are some great questions to ask them. And maybe you find out that there's another recruiter in the organization that handles your type of role better than this one. I also like to ask a question. I didn't put it on here. Is how long have you been a recruiter? All right. 3+ years is much, much stronger than less. Okay. 6 months, a year, whatever it is. I'll tell you what, I would never want to be a recruiter. It is a tough job. And you talk about getting paid for results, a contingency recruiter, that's it. And it's like, what have you done for me today? I understand that. And another good question is when did you begin your search? Where are they in the search process? So I broke it into months, but it can be different periods of time. But they start out by researching, then they do some screening, and then they select some and they present. And then the company starts making their selection. And if it's longer than about 4 months, what's going on? What's happening? Why is it taking so long? I've heard of people that got hired and 60 days later didn't work out and they got fired. And so they're back in the business of trying to find somebody. To me, that is a total failure on the part of the candidate and the interviewer when that occurs. Your job as an interviewer is to reduce that risk. That's the way they look at it. Don't want to hire somebody that's risky, and to make sure there's a good fit. And so is yours. So that would be a good thing to find out where the heck is going on. And then, have you placed anyone in the company before? That's a really key question, because that says they probably have a relationship inside of the company. Might want to chase down that information when you find out, yeah, I have. And I said, well, can you tell me about the culture of the company? Can you tell me about the hiring manager? Can you tell me about their hiring process? Find out all that kind of information. If you were at work and somebody said, okay, I know you don't know a whole lot about this, but I want you to investigate, let's say, use taxes. All right. Sales and use taxes. And you don't know anything about sales and use taxes. You would do the same thing about figuring all that out as we're talking about right now with the job search. We start finding out. That's why you're here today, is giving you some information on how to help you do that. Now, if you're talking about the position in the company with the recruiter, sometimes you don't even have a job description. They call you and say, it's a great position. I think it's a great fit. No, what's your salary requirements? Which is another, that's what we talk about that in the interview workshop, about how to handle salary questions. what do you know about the job, the company, the culture, the leadership style, the hiring manager? What's the company's hiring process style? What are the qualifications? What do you know? What are you looking for? What are they looking for? Remember this, recruiters do not find jobs for us, okay? When we call them up and say, this is what we're looking for, if we think that they're going to go out there and hunt for a position for us, we got another thing coming. I know most of you know that, but sometimes we act like that and we say, gee, I haven't heard anything from them. They don't call me back, all right? So I would ask you this. If you get paid by the amount of time you spend to get people hired, what is the value of calling people and telling them they didn't make it? How does that help them, make their money? I mean, they're just not going to do it, right? So looking at their frame of reference, we can understand why they don't call us. Yeah, it's like you say you'll call, but you won't. And then in the closing, there's some definite questions that I suggest we ask in the closing. Now, closing is very, very critical and probably one of the biggest areas that I see failure. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. I look forward to hearing from you soon, and that's the end of it. I have to keep from throwing up when I when I hear that, because I've heard it so many times. But that's not a close. That's not closing the sale. And so maybe we can find some information out from then on where we stand. It's called a trial close. How would you compare me to the ideal candidate? You could say, how do you see me fitting into this role? Well, there's several questions that you could ask there to try to get some sort of feedback. And even though they may not answer them, because legal has got them where they can't tell us anything and we have to tell them everything. But you could ask that question, and if you don't get an answer, or watch the body language. If they break eye contact, that's a negative sign. There's something wrong. And you might want to change it. It says, I get a feeling that you have some issue or some concern. Would you be willing to share that? All right. Don't just stop but saying, oh, I know there's a problem. Ask it. Maybe you get it, maybe you won't, but there's nothing wrong with asking. Where do we go from here? And who do I call if I have questions? Many people are trying to figure out, when should I contact the company after I met them? I don't know when to do it. I said, well, why don't you have two reasons to contact them? One is when you get at the next step, you say, well, what is the next step? Will I hear some back from this particular interview? Who will I hear back from? When should I expect to hear back from them? And if I don't hear back from them, can I give them a call on, set a date by right soon after the date when they say they are going to call you back. So it's all on their agenda. Some people say, okay, well, if I don't hear from you by next week, I'll call you. Well, you're kind of taking over the process. So I suggest it's better just to say, when will I hear back? When is that going to be? And who will I hear from? It might be the recruiter. It might be whoever they state. Then who do I call if I have questions is the other one, because you want to stay top of mind. So it would be great to say, you send them an email, you give them a call, whichever, and you just talk about, say, you're talking about this. And so I'm really curious about, and then you ask the question in the email. All right. So you're putting yourself top of mind again. You're getting back. There's no time limit or anything like that on doing this. And I would almost guarantee that after the interview, we all would say, yeah, I wish I'd asked this, or I wish I'd have said that, I wish I'd have done something different. So make notes of those, and that's a good time to start asking some questions. So there's a document, and let me see if I can put that in the chat window right now, called 200 Questions That Candidates May Ask.
Hey, Walt, I've got it. I'll put it in there.
Oh, phooey, I had it all prepared, everything to do it real quick, but you go ahead. I was really excited about doing that. But
you're really excited about it. Well, now you can take all the credit for it.
Well, I'm getting a little bit better at this Zoom thing. And so I was excited about being able to do that, because in the past, I couldn't figure out how to get the chat window up, put the file in it, and do all that while I'm having the presentation. But all right, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you doing that. But this document is kind of interesting because it's written to the hiring side. And so the questions for headhunters and recruiters, which means if you're a headhunter or a recruiter, you need to be prepared to answer questions from candidates like the following. And so It's a little bit different perspective. It's most of the time you go out there and look for questions to ask in an interview, and you can find about 15,000 of them. But this was a little interesting thing to look at. So you might be interested in reading that document. Okay, when we ask questions, it's going to be along the lines of figuring out who, and selling to them who we are, what we do, and how we can help. So you might say, well, I saw on the job description that, you know, there's about 6 main categories of activities that you do here. Can you tell me how much time would I be spending on a typical time period, a week or a month, on those particular areas? Because they might put something in a job description that you do 1 week out of the year and something that's on the job description that you do every day. And you'd like to know that. So that's a what we do question. You might ask, what are the characteristics of the successful candidate in this role? I mean, who are you looking for? What kind of person? And I contend that that overrides the other two, because if you don't fit the culture, then it doesn't matter that you can do it and that you can help them. They don't like you, they're not going to hire you. So do your due diligence on the company, find out the culture before you ever go interview, and you won't have to waste your time. I've heard that Fujitsu is a micromanaging style leadership company. I haven't validated that, but if you don't like that kind of style, you know, why go interview at Fujitsu? And then the I help. What can I do for you? I don't know. I don't know if Greg was here, is online today or not, but he had a story where he had an interview with the company, and they said, well, they asked him this first question, and he came back and says, well, I'm here to help you do what you need me to do to help you be successful. And they were shocked. He said, nobody's ever said that before. Nobody's ever put us first. The candidate's always been putting the candidate first instead of the company first. What can I do for you? Because, you know, they don't hire you to go project manage. They hire you for the results of your project management. So I do is project management. Well, how can I help? The results of the project management. So those are the 3 areas that I suggest we ask questions about. So ask questions that demonstrate your interest, your drive to excel in the role, and the fact that you've done your homework, research. I got an email last week, and it's from a candidate that said, I got an email from the recruiter, and it said, we were really impressed with your interest and enthusiasm and your knowledge about the company. Okay, huge differentiator. How many recruiters do you think would send an email out to a candidate that says something like that? That means they were very successful at standing out very positively with those 2 aspects of the interview. All right, Mark, are you awake?
I am awake. Yes, I am. And I was just typing a note to Jeff. I have a repairman coming at 2 o'clock, and so I may need to step away briefly, but we'll see. I may get done before 2 o'clock as well. So let me share my screen. Again, here we go. Guess what? I lost the control, but I lost the chat window when I did that.
Start it and stop the chat again.
Yeah.
I'll help you out. I can keep track, and Jeff will help you out.
There we go. Here we go. There was a question though. Let's give Walt a chance to answer it. The question was from Richard Joseph. Is it okay to ask when you have back-to-back interviews? Is it okay to ask some questions, the same question in back-to-back interviews? So what do you say to that, Walt?
Some questions might be the same. What they are not are they're all identical in every interview. You want to have different questions. You might want to have different star stories that represent the same type of area that you want to talk about. Difference, all right? So I would suggest that we try not to just have one set of questions that we ask. There's some questions that can get at the same thing by asking it a little differently. But, you know, they'll get back together and say, yeah, I got that question. Yeah, he asked me all those questions too, all right? And when they say it, it's like, it's a negative. It's a negative. I don't know why the job search is one more of deselection than it is selection, but let me find reasons not to hire you seems to be the game of today. So we don't want to give them any reasons not to do that. So my suggestion is I would have some different questions in there. So, but you still might want to ask a few that are essential from everybody you talk to. You want to add anything, Mark?
Yeah, no, I'm going to talk about that exactly. So these getting a good start questions that I'm going to go over in the next slide are questions that you want to ask to everyone. Now, you may not ask exactly the same question or word it exactly the same way, but you're going to, the gist of it is you're trying to find out what they perceive as the most important priorities for this job. And so everyone you talk to, you should ask that question or ask those types of questions. I have posted up in the chat box my favorite question document, 64 toughest interview questions, and I'll be referring to that in the presentation, but there it is for you guys to take a look at. And here's what I'm going to talk about in my part here, getting a good start, and then a few more things to avoid that Walt didn't mention or I will emphasize. Direct versus indirect questions. So, you know, the thought in your mind that you're curious about can also be delivered in different ways. And so we're going to talk about the difference between a direct question and an indirect question, and responding to difficult interview questions, using questions to respond to difficult interview questions. And so that's where the 64 question document comes in. And so in some cases, it's very appropriate to use a question to respond to a difficult question. But in other cases, the things you've learned by asking questions early in the process will inform your answer to a difficult question that comes later in the process. So, and then it's really hard to build rapport when you're in a panel interview, so you really can't ask personalized questions or directed questions. So we'll talk about that. Okay, how do you handle a panel interview and the pros and cons of how you ask different styles of questions. Okay, so that's my topics for today.
You know, it might be worth telling our participants today that the way these sessions were developed is Mark developed his and I developed mine, and it was primarily to give you two different perspectives. There is some overlap, but this was not a joint deal on our different sections.
That's right. That's right. Thanks, Walt. Okay, so the very first questions you ask, and I'm going to tell you now, you know, about 3 minutes into the interview, you're going to start asking questions. Okay, and the first 2 minutes are going to be your opening statement. Okay, opening statements are covered in session 6. So if you want to go back and review session 6, openings and closings, that's the title, then that's where we talk about opening statements. But your goal is to get a dialogue started by asking a question. You're going to, in some cases, you may want to build rapport. So that's your goal. And absolutely, essentially, these first few questions is about understanding their most important priorities. Okay. And we have another session just on analyzing the job description. I think it's number 5. I don't remember right now, but, and we spent a lot of time in that session talking about how unreliable job descriptions can be. Okay, so you want to verify, you know, some are good. Like, we can't say they're all good, but many of them are out of date. They were not prepared by this hiring manager. They were prepared in the past. And so it's worthwhile to spend some time at the beginning verifying what's in the job description. And you might as well just assume you've got a clean slate. Let's just start from scratch and ask, what are their most important priorities? So you give your opening statement, and then you've got a series of questions you want to ask, not just one. Okay, I'm going to talk about this. You want to ask 2 or 3 related questions. You can customize and personalize these to fit your situation, but here's some of the things. What can I do for you in the next 6 to 9 months for you to say that I've done an outstanding job? Now, I have to say, a lot of people ask this question at the end of the interview. I'd say quite a few, and we give them kudos for that, but it's in the wrong spot. It's too late. Okay, ask it right up front. what would I have done in the next 6 months where you'd say I've done an outstanding job? Or, and after they answer that, you may say, well, of those you listed, which do you want me to pay attention to first? Okay, or to help with first. Okay, so that's a really good question to ask. You can also ask, I was wondering if you could tell me more about the most important priorities of the position. You might even say, you know, I've analyzed this job description and I have a lot of good experience here. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit more about what the most important priorities are. Okay, so now, and that can be a very personalized question, right? And you ask everybody that question because the hiring manager may say one thing, the sales leader may say something else, the ops guy may say something else. One of your peers may have a different perspective on it totally. Ask them all. Ask them all. Ask the recruiter. What are the most important priorities? The recruiter should know. You know, they're not going to be a very good recruiter if they don't know. Okay, and sometimes they know things that aren't on the job description. And when we talk about recruiters as well in one of the previous sessions, so you can go back and review that. Okay. Then here's one that Walt already covered. You can ask this to recruiters. You can ask this to recruiters that call you on the phone. I was curious to hear, what was it about my background that interested you the most? Now, this is very open-ended, right? You're not saying what was in my resume, or it's just what was in my background. And so they may admit that they don't know that much about you. You were just a referral. But it's good to ask. It's good to ask, why are they interested in you? Another way to say that is, based on my background, where do you think I would have the most impact in your organization? Okay, so that right there, that assumes they've looked at your resume, and they may or they may not have, but they have some reason for bringing you in. So let's find out what was in my background that you think would be most impactful in this role. They're going to do your work for you, give you the answer to that question. Now, always phrase your questions using a positive perspective. This is one of my new things for 2021. All positive all the time. So this question, what challenges do you face? I don't know that I would share my challenges with a candidate, okay? You know, I would not be honest about that, okay? Where can I help improve your organization the most? That's a positive, more positive statement. Where can I help improve your organization the most? So just think about how you want to phrase that question. What keeps you up at night? Okay, that's a, you know, what do you worry about? Well, I'm not going to share with you what I worry about. You know, that's just, you know, I'm not going to share my dirty laundry. Okay, but you can phrase that question in a positive way to find out that casts you in a positive light, right? All positive all the time. Ask those questions in a positive way to glean the information that you really need, which is how you can help. Where do they need help the most? What do they see in your background that's going to be most helpful? So on and so forth. A few things to avoid. Walt mentioned a few. In the 64 tough questions document I sent out, they recommend that when the interviewer asks you the tell me about yourself question, gives you a chance to make an opening statement, that you know, kind of interrupt and say, well, you know, so we're not wasting our time. Could you tell me what your most important priorities are? Okay, well, that may work in parts of the country, but that does not work in Texas. That's considered very rude to answer a question with a question. Okay, so they've asked you a question. Please tell me about yourself. What brings you here today? You know, why do you think you're a good fit for this role? Do not immediately ask them another question. Give your opening statement. Okay, now I just mentioned that after you give your opening statement, you're going to start asking questions. So your opening statement needs to be based on the research that you've done, the informational interviews you've prepared, the LinkedIn research you've done, what you know about the company. And given that the job description may not be entirely reliable, you may not hit it exactly or even that close, but you're going to have to give your opening statement. You're going to talk about some achievements that you have done. And so those are all going to be positive things. You're going to talk about your motivation. You're going to talk about your professional training in your opening statement. And then you're going to ask your first question. And it's not going to be just one. It's going to be a series of questions to go pretty deep. Okay. Tell me what are your most important priorities? And then you may say, well, is there anything else? And you might say, well, what kind of soft skills do top performers in this role have? A whole series of questions to discover what they need help with. And that's after they've asked the first question, you've given your opening statement, and then you start asking your questions. So in general, it's not a good idea to answer a question with a question. I'm going to show you some exceptions in a couple of slides, but in general, do not do that. And don't ask questions about things that you could find out someplace else, like on the website or by asking the recruiter, okay? Now you may, at the end, the recruiter may have told you the process is going to go like this, A, B, C, D. You may want to verify that at the end of the interview. I understand that's the process. Is that correct from your perspective? But that means you've done your research, you put in the effort. There's quite things you can find out. Don't ask them what their mission statement is. It's going to be on the website. Don't ask them what their value statement is. It's going to be on the website. Okay. So go do your research. Don't ask questions that you can find the answer out yourself. Interviews are going to think you're just not that interested. It's like lack of enthusiasm. You haven't done your basic research. Okay, let's talk about direct questions versus indirect questions. So a direct question is who, what, where, when, how, when are you going to hire somebody? When do you need to make a decision? What are the requirements of this position? So those are direct questions. Indirect questions, sometimes called a question in a question, are a more formal and polite way to ask for information or make a request. Okay. They are often used when asking for something of strangers or people you do not know well, and I'm sure you do this. Okay, it's kind of a natural thing, and this includes coworkers that you don't know very well, and it's also used even to ask questions of friends when it might be an unusual or a difficult thing for them to agree to. You'll use this question in a question, so it's a little more passive, also a little more formal and polite. So it goes like this. The question is, can you tell me, or could you tell me? And then you ask your direct question, okay? Do you know? Do you know what the next step in the process is? Do you know if, or do you know whether, for a yes or no question? Do you know if you're going to make a decision this week? So that's a very direct question. You want to kind of avoid open-ended questions, but that's a yes, no. No, we're not going to make a decision this week. A more open-ended question is when do you expect to make a decision, or what is the process and how is it going to conclude? But sometimes if you need to ask a direct question, you can turn it into an indirect question and be a little more polite. Would you mind? Do you have any idea? Would it be possible? So those are all the first question, and then you ask the second question, the request or the information you need. I was wondering is a good question, and I am curious to know. Now, this curiosity question, I think, is really a very powerful question. And I was curious to know or hear or understand how your process for developing new employees works. Ask something like that. Curiosity is a very, I think, powerful, endearing, let's say, endearing. It's a good way to build rapport. Rapport is to express your curiosity about a topic. They may ask you a question. You may say, well, I was very curious about that. You can turn this around. After you answer the question, you say, I was very curious to hear how you guys did it, because this is the way I've done it in the past. That's a very good way to build rapport, that particular phrase. But asking questions in general and getting a dialogue going is an effective in general in building rapport. Is there any chance, okay, this is one you don't want to use. This is the one you might use with your friends. Is there any chance you could take me to the airport on Tuesday? Oh, by the way, my flight's at 5 a.m. So you don't want, that's a little too informal. You don't want to use that one in an interview, but that's just an example of a question in a very informal setting. Okay, here we go. Asking questions helps inform your response to challenging questions. And so we're going to pull about 6 or 8 examples out of this document. I highly encourage you to take a look at this document. It's maybe 30 pages, but there is some really good stuff in there about difficult questions you may encounter. And so tell me about yourself. Okay, so we've already mentioned this, and that's number one question in that document is the tell me about yourself. And that's a very common question you'll get right at the beginning of an interview as a chance for you to make an opening statement. And so, as I've already reviewed several times today, you're going to start asking questions as soon as you make your opening statement, okay? And you're going to know after they answer those questions their most important priorities, and maybe what soft skills are important or what the characteristics of top performers are in that role. You're going to have a lot of good information to inform how you respond to future questions or how you deal with future, to come very difficult questions. The fatal flaw question. The fatal flaw question is basically something you don't have that they call a requirement. So let's say you don't have a college degree. And, on there it says required, bachelor's of science in engineering or something. I know it says a degree on there. And so they're talking to you, they've agreed to talk to you. The hiring manager may not think this is a big deal, but one of the interviewers who's going to give you a thumbs up or thumbs down may think it's absolutely essential that everyone they hire, if it says bachelor's degree, they have to have a bachelor's degree. So how are you going to handle that? Well, you're going to talk not about your missing bachelor's degree, but you're going to talk about how your experience and your skills and your abilities match up to what they really need. I mean, because that's the important thing, right? Once you've asked them what's important and what's their top priority, and you match up with those priorities, then what's the big deal about not having that piece of paper? So that's your kind of perspective on that. And if you don't really know what they really need, it could be tough to get through this question. Here's kind of an opinion question, but for higher level people, they may say, what changes would you make if you came on board? Okay, well, how are you going to answer that question if you don't know what their most important priorities are or what their areas of greatest concern are? So the answer to that question is to address what they told you is the most important priorities. Well, I'm going to, here's where I would consider making changes. Okay, so here's kind of related to the fatal flaw question. I'm concerned that you don't have enough experience in a certain area. So then you go right back to the questions you ask, and summarize what they need and remind them, if you haven't had a chance, tell them how you meet those needs. Okay, so this kind of question is, you may not have enough experience in one area, but you really want them to consider the entire breadth and depth of your experience. And so they may be focusing on one area. You're going to answer this question in a bigger sense. I bring a lot to the table, and then you might put in there that I'm a fast learner, and I'm sure I'll come up to speed on that area as well in short order. Okay, so that was using these initial questions that you would ask to inform your answers to tough to questions that may come a little bit later. Here's just using a question to defer or to deal with difficult behavior. So one of the things that interviewers will do is they'll give you the silent treatment. So they may ask you a difficult question. Tell me about a time that you failed. You give them an answer. Then they don't respond. They just, kind of this awkward silence happens. And so what they're waiting to see is if you will start to ad lib, if you'll start adding additional information. They're just waiting to see what else will come out of your mouth. And believe me, it works. When you're the interviewer, people will just start trying to fill up the space because it's awkward. But just ask the question. Did I answer your question? Is there anything else I can fill in on that point? Don't start ad-libbing. You've answered the questions, let's move on. Now, another technique here, which we really won't talk about, but you could also offer to tell a story, okay? So if there's this awkward silence, at any time in the interview, you could offer to tell one of your achievement stories, okay? Would you like to hear about? And then they may say yes, or they may say no. And if they say yes, you're going to get a chance to take another story. So you're taking the interview now in a direction that you would like the interview to go. So that's a very powerful technique as well. How do you feel about nights and weekends? So this is number 33, and it's a really good answer to this question. You can say, well, yeah, I've done that before. What is the norm for your best people? I really like this question because you want to be one of their best people. So what is the norm for your best people for working nights and weekends? Something you'd like to know? Something they may be proud to tell you? So some of you in sales are going to be asked to sell them a pen or a stapler. So what are you going to do first? I mean, if you're a salesperson, you probably know this, right? You're going to start asking questions. Is that a pen in your pocket? What do you like about that pen? Why did you pick that brand? So you're going to start asking about the pen before you start trying to sell them a pen, because just like in the interview where you need to know what they're buying, as in terms of the next hire, as a sales question like this is you need to know what they like and dislike about the product you're trying to sell them. The salary question, Walt mentioned that question. Definitely you want to find out what their range is or what their budget is, okay? And I don't know if that's the first thing that you want to come out of your mouth when they ask you that question. We talk about it. We just talked about it last week, I think. But it's a good time to ask a question, and it's a question you definitely want to ask. Is find out what their range is after you share with them what your range might be, or defer until you have more requirements. You still want to ask. Say, well, I could do better answering that question if I had the job description. Could you forward that to me? And as soon as I get that, I'll let you know what my salary requirements are. But could you share with me your budget or your range? Now, here's a couple that I'm not really going to address. I think this is a homework assignment. You should look at the document. Look at this document that I gave you. And here's a question on a technique. There's actually 3 or 4 options in the document about how to answer an illegal question. Like, how old are you? How many children you have? What's your marital status? What's your religious affiliation or political affiliation? Where do you come from? Where were you born? Those things all are illegal questions. And so take a look at the document on how to answer that question. One way to answer that question is to ask a follow-up question, which is probably not the first choice. And that's why I didn't put the answer here, but it is a way. And same way with this next one, the opinion question. So what do you think about abortion, the death penalty, president? These are questions that should not be asked, okay? But sometimes they do get asked, maybe in an informal situation. They're having lunch or something, and the hiring person or the interview people, slip up. They should not ask these questions. Now, this is an exception where it might be an appropriate time to answer that question with a question and disarm them completely with, what do you ask? Because those questions are not in any way related to job functionality, right? Okay, neutral questions for panel interviews. So in a panel interview, you want to ask questions to get a dialogue going and to build rapport and to learn some things, okay? But it's not really a one-on-one thing at all, and it's not necessarily a good idea to give any particular interviewer extra attention until you figured out what their functional area is, okay? So once you have, and in a 30 or 45-minute interview, it may not be clear at all. So until you know that this person is the operations person, and this person is the salesperson, and this person is the HR person, you really need to ask very neutral questions that aren't aimed at anyone in particular. And so by asking these questions and seeing who answers, you may start to figure out what area of expertise they represent. You may know in advance. They may have told you, you're going to have this George from HR and Sally from operations, and so in advance. But if you don't, then you need to don't personalize your questions and make them open-ended and non-directed in anyone in particular. So good way to do that is to say, what do you think about? What do you think about a topic that's germane to the role? What do you think about using agile techniques for sales forecasting, for instance? And this is a leading question now, because you want to tell a story about using Agile for sales forecasting, but you just ask the group, well, what do you think about that? And so someone may answer, it's highly probable that you'll get a reverse on that question. Well, what do you think about it? And there you go. So you kind of led them to a topic that you think is interesting and will demonstrate your value by asking them an indirect question, and you haven't shown any particular favoritism at that point. Would you like to hear about a time that I, and mention something that you did really great? Would you like to hear about how I did something else? And then tell the result of one of your star stories that matches one of their most important priorities. Okay, you can still ask these same questions. What are the most important priorities for this job? And see who answers. They may decide to go round robin as well. I don't, some people say you should ask all, let's say there's 3 of them. You should ask all 3 of them. I don't know that I agree with that. I think that would be very awkward, but I think a good interview team would say, one person would get the answer and then they'd hand it off and say, well, Tom, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? And then they'd hand it off again. So you would hear, I think, if you ask that question to the group, you would get an answer from all 3 of them. And there's the star, and my doorbell just rang. So I'm going to step out for 2 minutes and then I'll be right back. Well, you can do that slide.
I feel so honored.
Come on in, I'm on the phone. So
Questions? Mark didn't mute himself. Yeah.
I just muted him.
Hi, it's Leora. I do have the question. So what if they ask one of the illegal questions and I go back with, why is that relevant? Or why do you ask? And then they give me an answer and they still want to know. How do I approach that?
Well, number one is, why do you ask? I would not suggest you ask that question. It's a why question. And then you are challenging the interviewer about that question. And I don't think challenge the interview is the right way to approach that. But you have these options, all right? And the options are really, I'll answer the question very briefly. Okay, that's an option. It says I'll answer the question. But the motive behind these types of questions is almost always, will it interfere with the performance of your job? All right. Well, that's kind of what, and the motive behind every question is important to know. Why are they asking this question? And so motive is extremely important. And so I'll come down to that. But you might just say, I've decided I'll answer that. I'll tell you what you don't do is tell them that's illegal and correct them and do that. That's not going to get you hired. But I would definitely just mention, if you want to mention that, and then say, I don't see anything with that particular situation that would keep me from doing, to the performance of this job and doing a good job for you, which is the motive, and just answering the motive. If you get hired, then you can go back and correct them. And then you go back and say, hey, you can tell HR says, hey, you got some people that don't know. Generally, they don't know that they're asking illegal questions. They're just not informed. Our interviewers are not the best interviewing examples in the world. Sometimes it's really pretty poor. I tried to make an impact in helping people do interviewing when I was in this company for a long time, and I didn't make a whole lot of impact with that, but that's my suggestion. Mark, you want to add anything? She was asking,
yeah, about that.
If they still want to know, what do you do?
Oh, if they still want to know if you, that's a really good question.
To me, that's a red flag.
I think, if you look at the if you look at the 64 interview, if you look at the document, and I really want you to take a, if you think you're going to be asking legal questions, I think you need to look at what is just it's a page or half a page. It gives you several options. Walt mentioned some, but in the end, one of the 2 questions there. Let me back up for a second. Opinion question or the illegal question. You could ask that question. You got to ask yourself, do I really want to work for this company? Okay, that's got to be going through your head. And if it's, this is when you might pull out the why do you ask? why do you ask? You know, I'm getting ready to bail on this thing. Why do you ask? Okay. I don't think, especially some of these illegal, well, now, some of these illegal questions like, do you have children, or other, or elderly parents are trying to find out if you have things going on outside the business, outside of work hours that are going to, you know, distract you. You know, so the answer to that question, as Walt mentioned, is, you know, I'm available to work on nights and weekends as needed. You know, what do your top performers do in this when there's a crunch time? Okay. And so you're not answering the question, do you have children or do you have elderly parents? You're asking the question of, are you available to work on project-based tasks? Okay, tasks that are time-bound. You know, your average may be 40 hours a week, but, you know, certain, you know, the last week of the month or something, you know, it may be more like 60 or 70. Can you do that? You know, and so instead of that asking that question, they ask a different question, but that's the one you answer. Okay. Some of them, like your race, your nationality, and things like that, I don't know. I would probably not answer that question very well. Like, why the hell does that matter? You know, I don't think anyone should be required to. So, sorry, Walt.
That's okay. There's another perspective that says, hey, I really want to work here. I'm not gonna let this dumb interviewer stop me from getting a good job. Okay. Now that might be different if it's the hiring manager, the one you report to, and you say, well, you know, people don't leave companies, they generally leave managers. It's the management that is messing up. Okay. So they're not strong in leadership. Does that help?
Oops.
But, you know, don't forget, you know, in a social style survey, there's drivers, there's analyticals, there's amiables and expressive. And amiables will ask family questions. They want to get to know you. They want to know about, you know, they're kind of in that mode. They're not trying to be illegal. They're generally interested in your life, you know, find out something about you. They're not intending to be legal. And when you get into the more informal interview settings, that's when most of these will show up.
Actually, I had a recruiter ask me that question. And when I asked him, how is that relevant? He said to me, well, because I only went back 20 years and a little bit older than that. He says, well, they're going to expect someone 40 years old and you're going to walk in and you're not 40 years old. So he said to me again, when did you graduate from college? How old are you?
So you might, if it's a recruiter, was it an internal recruiter or an external?
It was an external recruiter.
Okay. And you would handle a response differently for those two, because one's inside the company and one's, you know, the recruiter itself. And your response is, I think I can easily show that I can meet the job requirements and do this. So yes, there might be a first impression that, because, you know, all this bias, it's all out there. You know, you can't prove it most of the time, but it's out there. But you just tell the recruiter, said, I would love the opportunity to show them that I can do the job, that I'm the best choice. Would you be able to do that?
We've got a question on Facebook. Jim asked, I was asked once if I smoke. Can they ask me that?
Well, in general, they cannot ask you those health-related questions. There is an exception for COVID. But, you know, they may, I said that's in general, okay? Specifically, they can have a smoke-free environment also. So, and maybe the real question they should ask is, we have a smoke-free environment. Are you going to be okay with that, right? And they haven't asked you if you smoke or not. They just ask you if you can work in our smoke-free environment. So, yeah, I think in general, that's a poor way to ask the question, but you're going to need to answer with their intent is, you know, if you have a smoke-free environment, I'm okay with a smoke-free environment. Or not.
Somebody just put on the chat, I just applied for a job today where you had to agree to work in a tobacco-free environment.
Right.
And I think that's becoming more and more prevalent because, yeah.
Well, there are companies that, you know, no smoking is allowed in the building. So you can do that today.
Yeah, I worked for a company once, and at our facility up in Hapog, New York. So up on Long Island, when you drove up to the building, there was this cage outside the building where everybody wanted to smoke. I mean, it had a cage, it looked like a chicken cage, but there were people in there smoking because it was a secure facility. So they had to not allow you to be able to pass things outside of the place, but that's where you went to smoke. Think about it. And it's 20 degrees out or 10 degrees out and a foot of snow. I guess that's where you go to smoke. They didn't make it easy.
That's the question to the 4 interviewing types. So these are not interviewing types. This is one of those 750 surveys out there that put you in type of category of personality style, that sort of thing. Look up social style model, and it'll give you those 4 types: the driver, the analytical, the amiable, and the expressive. And it's, it's like anything else. If you can determine the characteristics of people quickly, then you know how to communicate with them more effectively. I came out as a driver, and that person is the one that everybody else has a problem with.
Anything else?
At the end of the interview, a person says, call if you have any questions. Yeah, you should ask, who do I call? You might even say, yeah, I'm probably going to have some questions after the interview is over. Who would I call? And if they say, call me, I would put a trial close on them. So let's say they say, if you have any other questions, then call me. And so you're going to say, I'm pretty sure I'll have a few questions. Let's say I call you on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. So now you got a follow-up call already scheduled for anything you think of that comes afterwards, and you'll think of something.
I have a question. What were the 4 types of interviewer?
4 types of personality. You had the amicable, the driver, what were they? Well,
it's driver, analytical, amiable, and expressive. I remember when I went through that, we had a class, and this guy stood up and says, I'm not analytical, and here's 3 reasons why.
Is there a slide on that, or was it from another presentation?
No, there's not. It's just something that I brought up. But some people want to know about you personally. That's their characteristics. They're not trying to be illegal about anything. They just want to know about your family, and do you have children, and things like that.
So with those 4 types, can you just give, like, if it's amicable, here's how you handle it. If it's
so, I would suggest, and that's a whole nother topic.
Okay.
I'll give you a short answer for each. The driver, he just wants to know the bottom line. Just tell me. He don't want to know how you got there. Nothing. Analytical wants to know every step in the process.
Okay.
Amiable is, did you make friends along the way? Okay. And the expressive is, did you have fun? All right. So it's something like that. I mean, you can look at some people's cubes and they're just decorated all over the place. That's an expressive. It's very, it's very easy to tell.
And there's tons of different personality tests and tests that are out there. So you don't know what they're going to ask, about each one that's out there.
So I have a question. I'm an ENTJ, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm a very hard driving New York type, usually very high income person. So any suggestions on that, or books you can read on that, how to bridge to other people? I'm usually interviewing with similar A-type characters.
Are you corporate legal?
Yes.
I would use LinkedIn to find corporate legal people and talk to them.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my first suggestion. I could tell you some things, but I think the legal people, I was trying to think of a person's name that came through Pit Crew sometime back, and she went out to Lockheed or something like that. But
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Because they can give you some. The thing about lawyers is there's a stereotype about lawyers that you have to overcome, right? What do you call 500 lawyers at the bottom of the sea? All those kind of jokes that you hear. But I was interviewing somebody, and she was looking for a corporate position, and she had been a litigator prior to that. And at the end of the interview, she says, "That's my problem. I've lost my litigation drive." All right, which is, you know, jump all over you at courtrooms. They just ask you questions, talk really nasty to you, and do all that kind of thing. She actually cried over that. She was really disappointed because she had lost that. But thank God she found out something in the interview process that says you probably ought to be the litigator and go back to doing that rather than a corporate role.
Adley, you said you're an ENTJ?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to put something in the chat box all about ENTJs.
Great. Thank you.
I think there's lots of books. The one I learned about Myers-Briggs was called Type Talk, and it talked about your particular personality type, but also how you interface with other people.
Great.
Different personality types. I mean, you don't really know other people's personality types. You just know yours and your strengths. But
I'm pretty self-aware, you know, on this, and I'm pretty good at, obviously, because I've closed over $200 billion worth of deals, so I know how to work with lots of different kinds of people. But on these interviews, you have to go really quick, and sometimes it's a panel, and it's usually a fairly aggressive, dynamic situation.
yeah,
So I need to, you know, assess quickly so I can address the different types quickly.
Nothing wrong with pausing and thinking of an answer. You don't have to do it all so rapidly.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you very, very much. Anything else you want to talk about your last slide? Practice, yes, no?
oh, we didn't get to practice. Yes, you should practice. You should practice, and you should specifically come and practice asking questions during the interview. If you're worried, if you don't have an opportunity at hand, you know, find something and just come and practice answering questions, because, you know, some of these questions, it doesn't really matter what the opportunity is, you know. Practice asking, what are your most important priorities? You know, now we as practice, you know, when we give the practice interviews, we don't necessarily work for the company, but we do prepare in advance. And so we'll have the same information you have, the job description. And, you know, I'll take a look. You know, a lot of the job descriptions have 10 or 15 requirements on there. I usually go through and I'll pick out what I think are the top 3 things that they're looking for. So we'll give you a good simulation of how to ask those questions and then respond to the answers. So come and practice. And you do that by sending a resume and a job description into the Pit Crew Gmail address. It takes a couple of days to set it up, you know, so I'll need to know your schedule as well. And take about 45 minutes for the interview, and then there's a feedback session. And I'm sure Walt covers this in his coaching as well. So Walt, what do you got to say?
Well, I was just going to add another comment that's a little different. That is, when you practice your interview, you want to practice your questions, right? So what do you practice? Well, let's suppose I ask you, have you had a time when you find it very difficult to have different departments collaborate on a project? Question to you, why did they ask you that question? I'll bet you they have problems with departmental collaboration, right? And so, I mean, they're telegraphing a need in that question. And so at the end of it, what might you ask? You say, well, can you tell me, how does the departmental collaboration work today? Right? So the question itself can say, I'd like to get some further information about what's going on. Just as an example.
One more question on Facebook before we stop. Jim asked, or not Jim, no, Daniel asked, if I have a trimmed beard for a sales job, is that a negative? Yeah. Having a beard, is that negative in an interview?
I would see if you could find any people that work for the company that have beards. You can go look on LinkedIn for a company and look up sales in that, and you can see pictures of people and do they have beards? That's just one idea.
No, I think that's the answer. That's the answer. If their culture includes beards, then it's not an issue. But if it doesn't,
You might ask a recruiter that question. This is, was there any problem with wearing a beard? And so my question to you be, are you willing to shave it or not? How important is your beard to you?
Right. So you can always grow it back after you get the job. So, you know, if you shave it before and grow it back
Yeah,
after.
after you get the job and you're a top performer, you can just change the culture.
Top
All right,
performers,
well.
top performers get to break a lot of rules.
All right, well, guys, thank you all very, very much. Just as a reminder, please join us, Career DFW and Career USA. We've got training sessions every day. Tuesdays, LinkedIn, Wednesday, interviewing, Thursdays, effective resume, Friday, the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. And starting next Monday, we're going to have a new group, new workshop all about networking. So tomorrow, Thursday, we'll have our effective resume Thursday. We're going to have resume tips. Our speaker has actually a co-host who will be joining us. So please join us, and you have an opportunity to win a month's use of unlimited use of jobscan.co. This Friday at the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group at 9:30 in the morning. Keep your eye on the prize, continuing learn and adapt for career successes. Next Monday for our initial Networking Monday session, our speaker will be Carol Bukel. She's going to talk about the secrets for effective networking. Every week we'll have a different speaker talking about networking. So it won't be any one person in particular. We'll keep rotating through, and I've got 8 or 12 people lined up that I'm lining up to talk about networking. So as we get them lined up, we'll have them in there. So please come back and join us. And people have asked, you know, how do I make that phone call? How do I break in to go starting a network with people? So join us on Mondays for our new session. Next Tuesday, our speaker on LinkedIn Tuesdays will be Ruth Lipsky. She'll be talking about LinkedIn search engine optimization, how to optimize your LinkedIn profile. And the next Wednesday will be on lesson number 9, demonstrating enthusiasm and changing careers or the industry, how to handle that. This session has been recorded. It will be on the Career DFW Facebook page, and will be on the Career USA YouTube channel in just a couple hours as soon as it gets uploaded. Please check each page, follow us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd really appreciate it. If you go to the YouTube channel, it's the Career USA YouTube channel. Make sure you're on playlist and don't click on the video, but click underneath where the green arrow is and it says view full playlist. When you click there, up will come a list of all the different programs we've done along with the date and the title of it, so you can see the most current ones we do. We do not post these slides. We don't give out the slides from today's presentation because without the words, they sort of miss a lot of meaning, but you can go back and watch the presentation as much and as often as you like to. If you're not receiving emails about our workshops, if you just found out about this from a friend and you'd like to get emails, we put out 6 or 7 emails a week. You can subscribe, and I'll put this email address up at the very end of our presentation. Okay, well, I'm apparently talking and my slides are not moving. Sorry about this. Here we go. So if you'd like to join our LinkedIn groups, we do have a Career DFW and Career USA LinkedIn group. And please remember, Mark and Walt and myself, we're all volunteers. We're just here to help you. Career DFW is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We have no full or part-time employees. Everything I've done over the last 12 or 13 years has been strictly as a volunteer. I don't get paid to do this. This is what I do to give back to the community, like Mark running the pit crew, giving back his time to lead the pit crew to help you practice your interviewing skills, and Walt giving his time to give back to help give you interviewing skills. So we survive on donations. It pays for the Zoom, it pays for web names, for all the things we have to pay for. So please consider, when you do land your next opportunity, please consider making a donation so we can continue to do what we're doing. So thank you for joining us today. Please join. If you haven't joined, there's the email address at the very bottom. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.